Dan Orlovsky joining us on the Arizona Sports Line. Dan, thanks so much for the time, man. How's it going?
You got it. I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing good, Danny. Really appreciate you joining us, buddy.
Of course.
Dan, let's start with Kyler Murray here through the first 6 weeks. Wolf and I were talking about this yesterday. At least in my opinion, like, he's been good. He hasn't been bad, but at the same time, they've had a couple games here where the offense hasn't gotten going, and you would hope that maybe he could spark something. What have you seen from Kyler Murray through 6 weeks?
Yeah, I think Kyler's had a really good start to the season. It hasn't been perfect. I don't want to intimate that. There's been probably 2 games that have stood out that have been subpar, and he's certain as an offensive performance, and he has had his hand in that. I would probably say the most disappointing game was this past one against Green Bay. There was no rhythm offensively early on, and there was no way and nobody that dug them out of that. Obviously, Marv goes down. There were some drops. They're behind the stick. So, I think that you've seen development and growth from Kyler, and still they're running a relatively, with Drew, a kind of unique system. It's a system that in many ways has really cool positives with a ton of the tight end usage and all the different things that they do with those tight ends. But there is a cap to it. Yes, there is you're not having a ton ability to push the ball downfield on a consistent basis because tight ends aren't necessarily people that you usually push the ball downfield with. So, I think you've seen Kyler be a good decision maker. I think you've seen Kyler grow in playing on rhythm, playing in time. I think you've seen Kyler grow with his ability to make different throws. But it certainly hasn't been a runaway offensive performance, but I do think there have been a good amount of highs.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that, Danny. I really am. Listen, Kyler needs to get better. There's no doubt about it. I think he'd be the first one probably to tell you that right now. But let me ask you this, Danny. Do you think that Kyler Murray gets weighed and measured on a different scale than other quarterbacks?
Well, I think, one, when you're the number one pick, you always are in that regard. 2, when you get a massive contract, you always are.
Yeah.
And then 3, you are physically more dynamic and more athletic and more jaw-dropping, you always are. So I think with those 3 things attached to who Kyler is as a player in his career, yeah, he's going to get measured a little bit differently with and maybe with different and unfair expectations. Starting at quarterback in the NFL is not fair. It's not a fair evaluation because you are expected to be as good as anybody who's considered the best in the league. So, hey, Kyler, you got to be Lamar, you got to be Patrick, and obviously those are unrealistic for most people. So, yeah, I think that there's a lofty expectation and lofty, I guess, belief that we live in a world where we mistakenly still think, well, the quarterback is just supposed to elevate everybody around him.
Yeah.
And there's just a harsh reality that there's just not that many quarterbacks who do. There's just not. There's 4. And even then, they're not taking nobodies and making them all pros. They're making good players into really good players, really good players into great players, average players to above average players. So that's just the world that we live in when it comes to those starting quarterbacks that come with those accolades.
We're talking to Dan Orlovsky. You can hear him calling the Cardinals Chargers exclusively on ESPN Plus on Monday with Chris Fowler, Louis Riddick, and Laura Rutledge. Dan, Marvin Harrison Jr., if you look at him before the injury, so I guess through the first 5 games, his numbers weren't bad for a rookie, but if you're looking at him as the number 1 receiver, and the Cardinals are kind of asking that of him, he's been inconsistent. From a quarterback's perspective, what is that like trying to develop that chemistry with a young player like that at receiver when maybe you're not quite on the same page all the time yet?
Yeah, it's obviously a challenge. We don't see receivers. We've had some over the past couple of years step right in and kind of have jaw-dropping performances as rookies. I think those were, my mind goes to a Jamar Chase when he stepped in with Joe Burrow as a rookie. Very different offensive scheme, though. That was a scheme in Cincinnati that was going to be 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers, and they were going to throw it a ton. That's not who the Cardinals are. We just had this call with our crew, and that was one of the questions that some of the people in our production crew asked was, why is Marvin not dominating, maybe like a Malik Neighbors is? And I said, well, one, that offense in New York, they're throwing the ball a ton, and they're playing with 3 wide receivers on the field a ton. So they're a run or a pass-first offense right now. The Cardinals are playing with 3 tight ends on the field. They're a run-first offense right now. And so that doesn't mean Marvin's not incapable of being that number one. It's just not being asked to, because that's not what's best for their offense right now. I think the second thing is, and I'd be interested to see if Marvin kind of talks about this, is I think that corners have started to get up at the line of scrimmage and challenge him a little bit more physically. Yeah. You certainly saw it with Jair last weekend. And that's different in this league. You maybe didn't experience it at the level in college that he is now. And so he's going to have to learn some different ways to win off the line of scrimmage, because then he can get into that very high-end route running that he has.
For me, Danny, I'd like to see him get a little bit better. And a lot of rookies are in this situation. They have to get better at something. I would like to see Marvin Harrison Jr. get a little bit better on adjusting to the ball that is in the air. A ball that is in the air. I don't know if you've noticed this or not yourself. I just think he can do a little bit better. Now, again, a lot of that is on the quarterback as well, but I think Marvin Harrison Jr. can do a better job of adjusting on balls that are in the air and where he's catching the ball away from his body. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is all about reps. That's all about the experience with, Kyler, and what kind of throw are you expecting in these situations? Where do you want me in these situations when I'm running this type of route and the defender's here? Where do you see the ball getting thrown? So I think that's a growth process. Absolutely. He's got the skill and the talent. I think a lot of times when young kids at that position come into the league and there's these high expectations, you're just trying to go out there and make sure that you don't make the mistake or mess up, especially guys that have such high expectations for themselves. And so, they get into the habit of like whatever it takes to catch the ball, and maybe it's not the most skill or trait consistent thing, but like, hey, I made the catch, And so I think the more he gets comfortable, the more we'll see that grow.
Dan, the game on Monday, the Cardinals are dealing with a pretty beat-up defensive line, and the Chargers sure seem to like to run the football. Why are they being so effective with Jim Harbaugh early on this year?
Yeah, the Chargers are very impressive. It's as well-coached a team that I've watched on tape this year, and I've watched every single snap of the NFL this season. So I think offensively, the number one takeaway is they just don't chase plays. They don't ever catch themselves chasing offense or chasing a big play. They're really centered and focused on, can we be efficient on this play? Can we play in rhythm on this play? And they've got everybody on their offense in that mindset. They're back, JK, and I say this in reverence, he's got a little James Conner in him. Again, I talked to our production crew. I said both these backs are just really tough tackles. These guys are strong. They've got low center of gravity. You very rarely see a second or third level defender tackling them one-on-one. And so, Dobbins runs the ball really well. Greg Roman, who's the offensive coordinator, I don't know how much, people in Arizona or Cardinals fans pay attention to the Ravens, but Baltimore uses a 300-pound athlete as like a tight end fullback in Patrick Ricard.
Oh, I know all about it, Danny.
The Chargers have a guy, Matlock, that is in a very similar role. And so they're really efficient in their run game, and they're really good up front, and they are unapologetic about kind of the style of offense that they want to play.
Danny, only got a minute left here, my last one right here, but the running game appears to be back in the National Football League. Why do you think that is, and do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Number one, the rules, because defenses could no longer put hands on receivers downfield, and you can't hit guys going across the middle like you used to, so the rules promoted offenses saying, well, let's throw the ball because it's easier to do it, and it's more advantageous to do it. Number two, the quarterbacks are so ridiculously athletic and talented that, along with the receivers that have come into the NFL, that explosive plays are just outrageous. And so defenses have said, well, we're just going to protect against that stuff. We're going to make sure that you have to take that super talented quarterback and you have to check the ball down, and we're going to try to keep the ball in front of us, so you have to drive the length of the field. And so teams have finally started to pay attention to that being the case and going, okay, well, we can't chase. That's what I said about the Chargers. You can't constantly try to fabricate big plays. You've got to be willing to be a little bit more disciplined in your approach. And I think more and more offensive coordinators are realizing that.
Dan, it's always great to talk to you, man. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
All right, you too. That's Dan Orlovsky joining us right there on the Arizona Sports Line. Boy, every time we have him on, he's
love
good.
him. I just love listening to him. I really do. He's really good.
I mean, he is a pro, so maybe we should expect that, but still.
Thanks for watching Wolf and Luke. Tap to see more and click the button in the middle to subscribe to Arizona Sports.